but incredibly creative. And for us, it's about, well, how do we harness that creativity? How do we think outside the box? And how do we do things for our organization that is completely different? And how do we test things without hugely over-investing? So I'm going to give you an example from both the for-profit world and the non-profit world and different markets around the world to talk a little bit about that creativity and to talk a little bit about how organizations are thinking outside the box. I'm going to start, though, with this. Does anyone know what those are? Charities. I cannot think of a more lifeless, unimaginative, uncreative, horrible thing to have to try and build a brand around. Yet, somebody did. And it was a chap, a 26-year-old from Ogilvy, here in Toronto, that did just that.
Freddy's are supposed to be square.
Have any of these diamond shapes gone out?
New Diamond Shreddy cereal. Same 100% whole grain wheat in a delicious diamond shape.
I mean, that became a very successful campaign. They then started posting on YouTube. They actually had user testing groups. And they brought in real people to it, and they say, well, which one tastes better? And what's even more amazing is people answered. And you should go online and see it. It's absolutely funny. And it was so successful that they actually did a whole campaign around it, and they created this, the combo pack. So, I think that the point that I'm trying to make here is that if you can be inspired by what is, without sugar and a lot of sugar and milk, a piece of cardboard, then how can we as organizations brand ourselves and use the media and use the changing nature of human behavior to brand ourselves, where our missions are so much more inspiring? And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about thinking outside the box first. This is UNICEF Bolivia. If anyone's ever tried to fundraise in Bolivia, there's a couple of little challenges. The first little challenge is that there's no real postal system. The second challenge is that there's no real address or way to identify an individual target, a potential donor. And the third, and possibly the most, is that there's actually no banking system. So it's very challenging because there's no credit cards, there's no bank, it's tough. And I think when you're trying to raise money, one would suggest that's probably a little hurdle. And so what they did was they did a telethon. They just thought, we're going to go big, we're going to do a telethon. And we're going to raise money. And a couple of years ago, they did just that. They did a telethon, and at the end of it, they thought, well, how do we raise money in a telethon if people that are calling that want to pledge can't give a credit card, can't give their bank details? And they said, well, that's easy. And so what they did was they did a telethon. At the end of the night, they got 100 volunteers out on 100 mopeds, and they drove around the city picking up the cash. They raised $200,000. That is an inspiring story of people that didn't think there and go, well, the pyramid says we have to do this. And then we have to do this, and then we DM. This is somebody that said, no, we're going to do something completely different because we're not bounded by the processes that maybe bind us as professionals in other parts of the world. Here is an example of an organization that did the same thing. So I'm going to ask you, this is this is the Red Cross in France. Now, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of an interactive thing. I'm going to say the words Red Cross. And the Red Cross, amazing organization, wonderful work globally. But when you think of the words Red Cross, I want you to picture in your mind a couple of adjectives, a couple of things that you think about. And I'm going to ask you these questions. Would you, are these any of those? Cool, hip, sexy. Are they any of the adjectives that you thought of? Possibly not. And so, what the Red Cross France wanted to do was they wanted to change that. And so they decided to change it by a very simple concept that they have called collections in France. In Europe, they have this thing called collections, where every single organization is allowed one day to go on the street and raise a ton of cash. And so the Red Cross had found that their donations were actually just tanking. So they